Flames tore across Colorado's drought-cracked hills, swallowing fences, sheds, pasture, everything dry enough to burn. Clara Bennett stood beside her cabin with one arm around Henry, watching sparks rain toward the strange green ring their neighbors had mocked all summer. They had called Clover useless, foolish, wasteful. Now a wildfire raced straight at them while every nearby field disappeared beneath smoke. Yet Clara's ground remained low, damp, and stubbornly alive. Before sunrise, that simple choice would decide who escaped, what survived, and whether laughter turned into shame. Where are you watching from? Subscribe, because this quiet widow's answer began months earlier with a handful of seeds. Early that spring, Clara stood alone at the edge of her narrow field, turning white clover seeds in her palm as a dry wind pushed dust across the yard. Her husband, Samuel, had been gone nearly 3 years, killed when a pine trunk split during a logging job. His death had left her with 12-year-old Henry, a weathered cabin, 2 goats, and land that seemed determined to test them. Rain stopped before the season had properly begun. No dark clouds arrived to soften the heat. Creek water sank between exposed stones, and grass along the hills faded before summer. Neighbors planted corn, beans, and potatoes, hoping the weather would turn. Clara studied the brittle weeds, pressing close to every wall of her home. Samuel had once told her something she never forgot. "Fire doesn't need strength," he had said. "It only needs a path." With those words in mind, Clara removed brush, dragged fallen limbs away, and marked a broad circle around the cabin. Inside shallow trenches, she sowed clover close enough to form a thick living carpet. The plant stayed low, covered exposed soil, and held moisture longer than the wild grass surrounding their home. From the porch, Henry watched her work. "Folks are gonna laugh." "They already do," Clara replied. "That doesn't make them right." Water was precious, so she saved every drop she could. Cooled dishwater went into buckets. One brief storm filled barrels beneath the roof. Each evening, mother and son carried small pails around the circle, feeding the roots while the nearby pasture faded to brown. Within weeks, green leaves spread around the cabin like a quiet border. Wade Mercer noticed them while passing the fence in his wagon. He slowed, stared at Clara's work, and called loudly enough for Henry to hear. "You planning to feed rabbits?" he asked. "Or save your house?" Clara straightened, brushed soil from her skirt, and looked beyond Wade toward the dry hills. "Maybe both," she said, "but mostly I'm trying to keep fire from reaching these walls." A hard laugh burst from Wade. The 2 hired men riding behind him joined in, and Henry lowered his head. "Clover won't stop a wildfire," Wade said. "It'll dry out like everything else. Not if I keep it low and watered." By supper, the joke had reached half the settlement. Men repeated it outside the feed store. Women smiled behind gloved hands. Children began calling Clara's home the rabbit cabin, and Henry heard the name whenever he walked into town. Still, Clara kept working. She trimmed the clover before its stems could rise, cleared dead weeds from the yard, and moved the firewood downhill, well away from the porch. Beyond the green ring, she widened a shallow strip of bare earth. Narrow channels guided every saved drop toward the roots. One evening, Henry kicked at the dust. "What if they're right?" Clara rested a hand on his shoulder. "Then we lose nothing except effort. If they're wrong, effort may be all we have." Would you have trusted her plan while experienced ranchers laughed at it? Subscribe to the channel, because people who appear foolish at first often notice danger before everyone else. Summer tightened its grip. The creek narrowed to a thin ribbon, Cattle crowded muddy pools, and pine needles snapped beneath every boot. Even the birds abandoned the fence lines before noon. Each hot gust carried the bitter smell of scorched grass. One afternoon, Henry stepped outside and pointed toward the western ridge. A dark smear was spreading above the trees. "Ma," he whispered, "are those storm clouds finally coming?" Clara followed his finger, and her stomach tightened. The western sky held no rain. A brown-black column rolled above the ridge, widening beneath the wind. "That's smoke," she said. "Get the horse." Henry froze for half a breath, then ran. Within minutes, bells clanged across the settlement. Men shouted between fields. Women dragged trunks onto wagons while children gathered blankets, food, and water. Somewhere beyond the ridge, lightning had struck dry timber, and the fire was moving faster than any rider could carry warning. Clara climbed onto the roof with 2 buckets and soaked the wooden shingles until water streamed from the eaves. Below, Henry tied sacks behind the saddle and placed Samuel's old coat inside one of them. Wade Mercer thundered past with his family crowded into a wagon. "Leave now," he yelled. "That patch won't save you." After glancing at the hills, Clara looked down at the green ring. "Take Henry to the creek road if it reaches the fence," she called. "Don't wait for me." "I'm not leaving you." "You'll do exactly what I say." No argument followed. Her voice had ended it. Next, she closed every shutter, stuffed damp cloth beneath the door, moved a stack of kindling away from the wall, and poured the remaining barrel water into the shallow trench around the Clover. Soil darkened. Leaves bent beneath the flow. By late afternoon, smoke had erased the sun. Chickens crowded beneath the porch, and both goats strained against their ropes. Ash began to fall. Small gray flakes settled across the clover, followed by glowing sparks that hissed against the wet leaves. Beyond the fence, orange light flickered through the trees. A deep roar rose above the wind. The wildfire had reached their pasture. Flames raced through the dry grass like water rushing downhill, bending low beneath the wind before leaping around fence posts and dead brush. Henry pulled both goats toward the cabin, while Clara grabbed a wet blanket and stamped out sparks near the porch. "Stay inside the ring," she shouted. Heat struck in waves. A shed near the road caught first, then collapsed with a crack like a rifle shot. Burning weeds rushed toward Clara's boundary, fast, bright, hungry. At the bare trench, the fire stumbled. Tall flames shrank into shorter tongues. Dry grass ended. Clover blackened along the outer edge, but the low, damp leaves refused to carry the blaze forward. Smoke wrapped around the cabin while scattered embers skipped across the break. Clara beat one spark out. Henry smothered another with soil. There was no magic in her plan. Clover could not defeat a wildfire by itself. But the short growth, cleared brush, wet earth, and distant firewood had taken away the path the flames needed. For several terrible minutes, the blaze crawled around them instead of charging through. A wagon wheel cracked near the road. Through the smoke, Clara spotted Wade's young daughter, Elsie, lying beside an overturned cart while fire closed around the ditch. The rest of Wade's family had already moved ahead, unaware that she had fallen. "Ma, no!" Henry cried. Clara pulled the wet blanket over her shoulders and ran across the safer side of the ring. Smoke hid the road, but Elsie's coughing guided her. Reaching the child, Clara lifted her and fought back through the burning air. As they stumbled inside the clover, Henry dragged them both to the ground. Behind them, the main fire divided around the cabin and roared past. None of them dared breathe easily yet. For a long moment, only the crack of burning timber and Elsie's coughing broke the silence. Clara held the girl close, while Henry watched the pasture glow beyond the scorched rim of clover. Near dawn, the wind finally weakened. Smoke drifted low as hoofbeats approached through the gray light. Wade appeared first, stumbling beside his horse with ash streaked across his face. When he saw Elsie standing beside Clara's cabin, he dropped the reins and ran to her. He held his daughter so tightly that she cried. Only then did Wade look around. Black fields stretched in every direction. Fence lines had vanished, and his shed was gone. Yet Clara's cabin still stood inside a darkened green circle, its walls stained with soot but untouched by flame. "I was wrong," he said quietly. Clara waited. Turning toward the neighbors gathering behind him, Wade raised his voice. "I laughed at her. All of us did. She saw what this land was becoming, and we were too proud to listen." Clara pointed toward the ring. "The clover helped, but it wasn't magic. We cleared brush, moved wood, cut the growth low, and saved water. One thing alone would not have been enough." During the weeks that followed, nobody called it the Rabbit Cabin again. Families rebuilt sheds and fences. Clara showed them how to dig bare strips, remove dead grass, store firewood farther from their homes, and plant low ground cover where the soil allowed. Henry walked beside her, measuring each new ring with Samuel's rope. By the next spring, clover blossoms circled 6 rebuilt cabins. One morning, Wade stopped at Clara's gate, removed his hat, and smiled. "Looks like we're all feeding rabbits now." Clara smiled back. "Maybe," she said, "or maybe we learned to watch the ground." Years later, travelers still noticed the green circles surrounding those cabins. Few knew they had begun with one widow, one frightened boy, and a choice everyone mocked. Clara never asked for praise. She simply prepared. Subscribe for more stories in which courage, patience, and quiet wisdom outlast doubt when danger finally arrives.